In TypeScript, functions are known to be first-class citizens. What that means is functions are treated the same as any other data type. They can be assigned to variables, passed in as parameters to other functions, or even returned by functions. When a function is provided as a parameter to another function, this will be known as a callback function. Before we create any callback functions ourselves, let's first consider some code where we filter an array, and then later we'll update this code to leverage callback functions. To do this, first we'll create an array. We're going to create an array of food ratings, and I'm going to paste in some code for this array that I already typed up. So in our food ratings, we have cheese with a rating of 8, pasta with a rating of 7, toaster strudel with a rating of 9, and Pop-Tarts with a rating of 3. To filter this array, let's say we want to keep only elements which have a rating greater than 7. To do this, first we'll create a new array. We'll call it const filtered ratings, and we'll initialize it to be an empty array. Now what we want to do is we want to iterate through our food ratings, and if an element has a rating greater than 7, we'll add it to our filtered ratings, and if it doesn't, then we'll just ignore it. For iterating through our array, we'll use a for loop. We'll say for const food rating of food ratings, and like we said, if food rating dot rating is greater than 7, we will add this element to our filtered ratings. Now, once again, VS Code is getting mad at me. It has this red squiggle. It's getting mad because I didn't assign filtered ratings a type. For now, I'm just going to say any array, which will say this is an array which can contain any type of elements. It's not really good practice, but for now it's fine. We'll address this in like a later video. And then we'll go ahead and we'll log our filtered ratings. We'll go ahead and run our code. And when we run our code, we see that the filtered ratings just has cheese and toaster strudel, which is what we expect, as those are the only foods with rating greater than 7. Pasta is not included because it's exactly 7. If we wanted to include pasta, we could use greater than or equal to. Let's consider now that we also wanted to filter by other criteria. Maybe we want to filter by the food's name, or perhaps we just want to filter by different ratings. So maybe we want to filter by ratings less than 8 as well. In order to do this, we'd kind of have to copy paste all of this code. But really, the only relevant code here is this internal code of the for loop, where we're just creating a condition to say whether to keep the element or not. The rest of the logic, such as the for loop and the additional variable, is really kind of boilerplate code that we could reduce down. What we're going to do now is we're going to create a more generalized solution where we create a function which will take in the array food ratings, and that function will also take in a callback function which basically will just be used to tell it if an element should be kept or not. Then it's going to be a lot easier to invoke and filter by different criteria rather than copy pasting the entire for loop and all the surrounding code as well. To create our generalized filter function, we're going to say function filter array, and we want this filter function to work on not just food ratings, but any sort of array. So we're going to say this filter array function takes in an array of type any array. This isn't really great practice to use the any word to say any type can be provided, but we'll address this in a later discussion. So for now, we'll say array of type any array, and then we need to provide a callback function. We'll name that callback function should keep, and that callback function is going to take in a parameter, we'll call it element. It's also going to be of type any, since this filter array function can take in any type of array. And when that callback function is invoked, it needs to return a Boolean to say whether that element should be kept or removed. Now for our function body, we're going to copy over all of our code that we currently have, as the code is largely going to be the same. We'll rename some things. Rather than filtered ratings, we'll just generalize this to be filtered array. And then rather than iterating through food ratings, we're just going to iterate through this array parameter. And rather than our element being of type food rating, really our element could be anything. So we'll just name it Ellie. Now, as we mentioned, the only really interesting part is this internal logic where we determine if we should keep an element or not. And here is where we're going to invoke our callback function should_keep. We'll provide it the element, and that will tell us if we should keep the element or ignore the element. To invoke this, we can come down to our console log, and we'll invoke filter array. We'll provide it our food ratings, and then we provide it a callback function. We'll say food will be passed to the callback function, and in that function body, we'll say return food.rating is greater than 7. And now when we run our code, we should get the same results, but we actually got undefined. And looking back up at our code above, it's because we forgot our return statement. We need the filter array function to return the newly created filtered array. So we'll say return filtered array. We will rerun this code. And this time we now have the same result as previously, where we got our food cheese rating 8 and toaster strudel 9. And we do not have our other foods, which have a rating less than or equal to 7. So to break this back down a little bit, we created this generalized filter array function that we can reuse with multiple different filters. The filter function will take in the array that we want to filter, as well as a callback function to tell it whether that element should be kept or not. In our case, we named the callback function should_keep, and that callback function will be passed in the element, and it needs to return a Boolean to say if the element should be kept or not. If the callback function returns true, that means we want to keep the element. If the callback function returns false, we can ignore the element. Inside of our function, we initialize an empty array to contain the filtered results. And then we iterate through the array provided to us, and we invoke the callback function provided with each element. If that callback function is true, we keep the element by adding it to our new filtered array. And if it is false, we ignore it. Then we return the filtered array so that outside of this function, we have access to those filtered results. When we invoke it, we call the function, we give it the array, and then we give it our callback function to say whether the element should be kept or not. Since our argument was that this would be easier to create multiple filters, let's go ahead and look at how it would be to create a second filter. We'll simply copy paste our one line of code. We can actually reduce this even further as it is a one line arrow function. And this time we're going to say if food rating is less than 8. And now when we run this, we get two different arrays printed to the console. The first is what we already had. And the second is going to be everything with rating less than 8, which looks like it's working as expected. Now it turns out we kind of just reinvented the wheel here because this functionality is actually already available to us and it's built into arrays. So what we could have done is we could have just said food.ratings.filter, and we give it our callback function to say if the element should be kept or not. Now when we run this, we should get the expected results where we said to keep any food with rating less than 8, which it looks like has been done. To recap once again, what we've done is we started out with the problem statement that we wanted to filter some array. We had an array of food ratings and we wanted to filter based on some criteria about the rating or the name. Initially, we created a for loop, and inside of that for loop, we had logic to determine whether the element should be kept or not. Then we took it and we standardized it out where we created this filter function which can be provided any array, and a callback that would determine if the element should be kept or not. But really, this function was already built into arrays, so in the end, all we really needed to do was just food ratings, we call the filter function, and we give it a callback function that says whether an element should be kept or not. Now, internal to this filter method, all it's doing is it's basically just this exact code where it creates a new array, it iterates through the array provided to it, in this case food ratings, And for each element inside of food ratings, it will invoke our callback function to determine if this new array should include that element or not.